In December of 1773, a seemingly ordinary night in Boston transformed into one of the most defiant acts of rebellion in American history, reshaping the course of a nation. Can you imagine standing on a cold, moonlit dock, looking out over the water and catching a glimpse of a ship, its dark silhouette barely lit by the stars? What if that ship wasn't just any vessel, but the very symbol of your oppression? The Boston Tea Party was not merely a protest against tea taxes. It was an explosive cocktail of frustration, determination, and desperation. It was an act that would ignite a revolution. You might be wondering how something as simple as throwing tea into a harbor could make headlines that would ripple through history, leaving an indelible mark on the quest for freedom. Stick with me, and you'll discover not only the story behind this audacious act, but the motivations, aspirations, and the deep-seated tensions that simmered beneath the surface of colonial America. By the end, you'll gain insight into a turning point that shaped the identity of a burgeoning nation. To truly grasp the spirit of the Boston Tea Party, we need to turn back the clock to the years leading up to 1773. Picture the New World, a landscape bustling with possibility yet marred by colonial tensions. The inhabitants, primarily English colonists, had set eyes on a brighter horizon, yearned for independence, and thriving on the land they had forged for themselves. But simmering beneath the surface was a growing discontent towards the British Crown, primarily driven by taxation without representation. What does that even mean? In essence, the colonists were being forced to pay taxes to a government in which they had no voice. It was an intolerable injustice in their eyes, and they felt powerless against a distant monarch who seemed oblivious to their struggles. And here comes the twist: the British government, facing its own financial troubles following the costly French and Indian War, decided to impose a series of taxes on the colonies, all in the name of recovering its losses. Among these taxes was the infamous Stamp Act and, most notably, the Tea Act of 1773. This one single act made it possible for the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies, making their tea cheaper than the smuggled goods. Here's something you didn't expect: this was intended to curry favor with the colonists, but did the opposite. Instead of encouraging them to drink more tea, it enraged them. Why? Because it solidified the perception that England would always find a way to squeeze the colonists, even with the best of intentions. The reaction was swift. The days of merely simmering discontent began to boil over. Town meetings were held, and a resolute spirit of defiance began to take root among the colonists. At the forefront of the spirit were groups like the Sons of Liberty, radical patriots who viewed the Plymouth Rock of taxation as a stepping stone toward liberty. The likes of Samuel Adams emerged as passionate leaders, eloquently voicing the frustrations of the people. He argued that taxation without representation abridged their rights as Englishmen. With every meeting, with every pamphlet circulated, the growing sentiment of rebellion left many colonists wondering, what would it take to make England listen? Now, hang on a moment, what could possibly escalate matters beyond just dissent and pamphlets? When the tea arrived on ships from England, it wasn't just a beverage, it was a declaration of war. Thousands of pounds of tea were stored in the hold of 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. The sight of these ships docking in Boston Harbor ignited something electric within the colonists. Their feelings of indignation coalesced into a tangible plan. The question arose: how could they send a message to the Crown? Could it be summed up as simple as this: the tea must go? And as the days passed, the tension heightened. Town meetings grew smaller as factions developed more elaborate plans to address this brewing conflict. As word spread of an impending decision regarding the tea, you might have felt the collective breath of Boston hold, for the culmination of frustration was at hand. The night of December 16, 1773, became the stage for the audacious act of rebellion that we now know as the Boston Tea Party. Imagine the scene: a frigid night, the air thick with anticipation and resentment. The clock struck midnight, and a group of colonists, cloaked in secrecy, gathered at the harbor. But they weren't just any settlers. Oh no, These were members of the Sons of Liberty, fiery patriots united under the banner of independence. Among them was none other than Samuel Adams himself. You might picture these men, armed with the resolve of their shared struggles, stepping forth as one cohesive force, a force fused by shared hope and determination. What could propel them to take such drastic measures? How did they grapple with the idea of destroying property, even as they called for justice? It's crucial to note that for them, it was not about tea, it was about autonomy and the refusal to be subjugated by imperial rule. The message here was unmistakable: no longer would they accept being marginalized and powerless. As the group approached the waiting ships, tensions ran high. They began to methodically unload the cargo, the tea, symbolic of their grievances and resentment. With each box hurled overboard, the stakes grew higher. The act itself was radical, not just for its legality but for the boldness that it represented. They were taking back control over their lives, a sentiment energized by the moment. Did you know that approximately 342 chests of tea, worth over 10,000 pounds, were disposed of that night? It was a shocking amount, but even more shocking was the momentous decision to act so defiantly. This wasn't just property destruction, it was a calculated statement against tyranny, a metaphorical act of rebellion that would change the course of history. As tea leaves swirled through the water, they carried the dreams of freedom soaked in the revolutionary spirit of the colonies. Following the events of that fateful night, the ramifications were immediate and severe. What came next will leave you speechless. The British government's reaction was nothing short of punitive. Angered and humiliated, they enacted punitive measures known as the coercive acts, what the colonists dubbed the intolerable acts. These laws were designed to reassert control and deter further acts of dissent, but instead, they galvanized the colonies, propelling them toward unity. Surprising, isn't it? What should have choked the revolution in its cradle only fanned the flames of rebellion. Through acts like the First Continental Congress, the colonies began to forge a collective identity, realizing their shared struggles bound them in ways they hadn't recognized before. They were no longer isolated. From Virginia to Massachusetts, their voices would converge, stepping away from individual crises towards a cohesive front against British rule. But who were these rebels? You might be surprised to learn that the average participant in the Boston Tea Party was not simply a radical or a revolutionary. They were farmers, merchants, workers, ordinary people galvanized by a greater cause. They were hungry for change, ready to confront tyranny and injustice. What about the British perspective? Was there any understanding of what was stirring in the colonies? To the Crown, these colonists were mere subjects, expected to behave with decorum and compliance. But Boston was no longer home to passive acceptance. It was a crucible of revolution, ideologies colliding while dreams of freedom were forged in the heat of defiant actions. So what ultimately happened to the East India Company? Did their plans unravel in the wake of the colonists' actions? Absolutely. The tea that had been meant to foster goodwill had only served to release a torrent of rebellion. The East India Company found itself reeling, struggling with overstocked tea and a burgeoning distrust toward the colonies. What was once a monopoly on prosperity became a harbinger of unrest. As we unravel this tale, it's also crucial to dive deeper into one undeniable truth. The Boston Tea Party was revolutionary not only for its action but for its artistry and protest. The idea that ordinary people could enact change lit a fire that would eventually consume the very foundations of British authority. This act, though seemingly spontaneous, was a calculated decision, a rallying cry for other colonies and a beacon for new ideas of governance and representation. At this juncture, when the smoke had cleared and the tea had sunk beneath the waves, there remained a question: what next? What course would the American colonies take as tensions with Britain escalated? The answers were complex, weaving a story that would demand perpetual courage and unity among the colonists. Imagine the anticipation, the nervous energy as every town, every meeting breathed in the air of rebellion. Would it take skirmishes? Would it lead to war? Even as the days turned into months, the spirit of defiance expanded, filling not only the minds but the hearts of the colonists. The Boston Tea Party was merely the match that ignited the fire, paving the way for the unraveling of an empire, and change that would echo through time. Now, where do we go from here? With so much set in motion, the spark of revolution would only grow. But before we delve deeper into the aftermath and eventual birth of a nation, we pause at this pivotal moment, the Boston Tea Party, an act born of necessity and desperation that questioned the very fabric of governance. How would this single act of rebellion continue to resonate throughout history? Stay tuned, because I promise the journey is only just beginning. The story will soon evolve from an act in a harbor to a full-blown revolution, one that changed the course of history forever. As the shockwaves of the Boston Tea Party rippled across the colonies, a landscape of fervent discussion and heightened anticipation began to emerge. In towns and villages from the north to the south, the act of defiance united colonists in a shared purpose. You could feel the electrifying pulses of change surging through the air as whispers of rebellion fueled conversations in taverns and town halls. Would they stand together against oppression or buckle under the tightening grip of British authority? The response from Britain was strident and unwavering, an indication of just how seriously they took this insubordination. From the viewpoint of King George III and his ministers, the colonies were increasingly becoming a ticking time bomb that required containment. The reaction was swift. The coercive acts, later dubbed the Intolerable Acts, were the British government's way of reasserting its control. These measures included the closing of Boston Harbor until the lost tea was reimbursed and the revocation of Massachusetts' charter, effectively stripping the colony of its self-governance. Can you imagine the tension among the colonists? Their defiant act had provoked a storm, and now the entire colony was paying the price. The closing of Boston Harbor brought the economy to its knees, isolating the city and forcing many to reckon with the consequences of their actions. But rather than dishearten them, these oppressive measures bred unity and a collective resolve among the colonies. Instead of shrinking back, they rallied, leading to the formation of the First Continental Congress in 1774. The Congress was a meeting not just of grievances, but of aspirations, a burgeoning sense of identity and purpose that transcended regional divides. Delegates from 12 colonies convened to address not only immediate concerns but also their future as a collective body. What would it mean to be American in the face of British rule? Cold reality hung in the air, compelling each delegate to grapple with their desires for independence and their fears of war. Perhaps what's more astounding is that they recognized their individual struggles were interconnected. Their personal grievances spoke to a broader narrative of rights, representation, and the quest for liberty. Among those present were influential figures: John Adams, Patrick Henry, Benjamin Franklin, whose fiery rhetoric and impassioned speeches ignited discussions around a common cause. Picture the atmosphere, the air thick with tension and possibility as they debated not only how to respond to British policies but how to shape a new identity. It was within these deliberations that the solidification of a collective spirit took root. Would they send a petition to the king or declare outright rebellion? The lines between civil discourse and revolution began to blur, leading to conversations that would culminate in an echo of independence. Fast forward to the spring of 1775, tensions overflowed into open conflict. The seeds planted at the Continental Congress manifested themselves into skirmishes, first at Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. The shot heard round the world signaled a break. What once had been peaceful protest now evolved into violent confrontation. The colonists, emboldened by their unity and shared purpose, took arms against their former rulers. You can almost envision the scene, a mix of desperation and valor filling the air as this budding revolutionary consciousness bloomed. But hold on. Before we jump ahead too quickly, let's take a moment to reflect on the riptide of emotions coursing through the colonies. The Boston Tea Party had sparked something immense, but the question remained, how would different factions within the colonies respond? Surprising, isn't it? Not everyone was on the side of revolution. Loyalists also existed, those who remained faithful to the crown, believing that the British government was their protector. Their voices held power too, complete with their own fears and longings, giving rise to a tension so palpable it could almost be cut with a sword. As skirmishes raged on, the story of the revolution unfolded with intricate layers. Each conflict further polarized loyalists and patriots alike, driving supporters of the revolution to seek greater measures of organization. Committees of correspondence proliferated throughout the colonies, establishing lines of communication that not only shared news of British actions but fostered sentiments of unity. This intricate network allowed ideas to bounce from one town to another, galvanizing support and stoking the flames of rebellion. Did you know that amidst this turmoil, pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense gained monumental traction? Paine articulated the colonists' frustrations with clarity and conviction, urging them to sever ties with Britain once and for all. His words transcended the elite and resonated with commoners, reaching a broad audience that propelled thoughts of independence to the forefront of public discourse. The rebellious spirit intensified, becoming contagious as pamphlets circulated, igniting passions and framing the narrative of the fight for freedom. The Boston Tea Party had played a crucial role in forging the ideological foundation of the American Revolution, a revolution not just in arms but also in ideas. The colonists had evolved, transforming from disparate communities into a unified entity demanding their rights and autonomy. In some sense, the act of slinging tea into the harbor had served as a catalyst, releasing pent-up frustrations and laying bare the innate desire for self-governance. With each passing confrontation, they were forging an evolving identity that inspired men and women from all walks of life to lend their voices to the underlying cause of liberty. Forward we march now to the summer of 1776, where the anticipation hung heavy in the air. The Second Continental Congress had convened, and tensions reached a fever pitch. Independence was no longer a distant dream but a near certainty. One can almost feel the urgency in their discussions, sensing that a fundamental shift was on the horizon, too significant to ignore. Would they act decisively to break from British rule, or would hesitation lead to missed opportunity? And then, on July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. This was not just a legal document, it was a proclamation of intent, a manifesto of a newfound identity, asserting their desires for freedom, each word resonating with the resonance of those tossed tea leaves in Boston Harbor. The act of declaring independence was not just an endpoint but rather a culmination of years of resistance, struggle, and unified aspiration. What had started as a protest against taxation had blossomed into a full-fledged revolution. But wait, what came next? The path to establishing a new nation was not smooth. The fight for independence loomed ahead, punctuated by battles that would test the limits of resolve: Valley Forge, Saratoga, Yorktown. You might find it hard to believe that such a nascent nation would stand against the might of the British Empire, yet they did, driven by the ideals that had taken root during those early days of rebellion. Unity grew deeper with every skirmish fought, every challenge faced. In the years following the Revolution, as the smoke cleared and America began to find its footing, the echoes of the Boston Tea Party resounded throughout the new government structures being formed. The idea of representation resonated in the very fabric of American society, as the lessons learned from voicing opposition to the Crown informed debates about governance, rights, and the responsibilities of citizenship. Reflecting upon this journey, from a singular act of tearing tea apart to the unfolding tapestry of war and independence, one cannot ignore the monumental impact of that December night in 1773. The courage it took to hurl those tea chests into the icy tides not only reshaped a nation but inspired generations. It birthed a narrative that would resonate through time, invoking the ideals of liberty, equality, and the belief in the power of the people to challenge oppressive rule. As we examine the lessons of the Boston Tea Party and its aftermath, it's evident that rebellion comes in many forms, and sometimes it only takes a small act to create ripples that reshape the course of history. The struggles of the American Revolution continue to inspire movements for justice and self-determination around the globe, reminding us that the pursuit of freedom is a timeless endeavor, one that calls for courage, unity, and an unwavering commitment to envision a better future. So, as we conclude this narrative, keep in mind how an audacious act on a single wintry night in Boston ignited a conflagration of aspiration, dissent, and ultimately the birth of a nation. The Boston Tea Party, once seen merely as an act of petty vandalism over tea, has transformed into an enduring symbol of resistance, igniting conversations around autonomy and justice. Stay tuned as history unfolds, because the spirit of rebellion is woven into the very fabric of the identity we continue to explore. The quest for freedom is never truly finished. It continues to challenge, evolve, and inspire. This moment in time reminds us all to question injustice and to assert our rights, no matter the odds, an unyielding spirit that lives on through generations, echoing across the years as a call for change that refuses to be silenced.